Welcome, everyone. This is Science Distilled Virtual Edition. We are very excited to host this evening's event themed Protecting the Desert. Our panel tonight is made up of a group of leaders in conservation and stewardship. And they're going to bring their talents in storytelling, science, organizing, and education to the topic of protecting the desert. Before we go any further, we want to acknowledge the original and continued sovereignty of Native nations in our region and everywhere. We acknowledge that the places where we conduct science have deep ancestral ties to Indigenous peoples, and we recognize that these communities continue to thrive today. I hope you enjoyed the film Surviving. And on this evening's panel are the director and producer of the film, who we'll introduce in a moment, alongside a handful of other experts. If you are here on Zoom or watching us live on YouTube, we welcome you to enter your questions in the chat box at any time. We'll have a discussion with the panelists, and when it is time for Q&A, we'll call on audience members to unmute themselves and ask the questions that they submitted through the chat. So keep yourself on mute unless you're called on to ask a question. Science Distilled is co-hosted by the Terry Lee Wells Discovery Museum and DRI. DRI is the environmental research arm of the Nevada System of Higher Education. And now I'd like to introduce Patrick Turner to tell us a little bit about the discovery.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Science Distilled. We're happy to have you with us this evening. If you're not familiar with the discovery, or even if you are, we are a hands-on science museum located in downtown Reno. We are actually in the former Reno City Hall building at 490 South Center Street, and we invite you to come visit whenever you feel the need to explore science. We are open currently Wednesdays and weekends, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Advanced tickets are required, and you can find those on our website at nvdm.org.
So without further ado, we'll start with our panelists and introductions. They're going to introduce themselves one by one. They'll show their interests, where they're from, their work, and we've asked them to feel free to introduce themselves traditionally or in whatever way they feel comfortable. And so we'll start with Kopoka Jackson.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kopoka Jackson. I am currently the Restoration Projects Manager with the Middle Fork Willamette Watershed Council in Oregon. I am a member of the Wallapai tribe in northwestern Arizona, Gumyu. That's how we greet each other there. That's how we say, how are you? Yeah, my interests. I am professionally an ecologist. I like to work in traditional ecological knowledge and water quality, and I typically do a lot of habitat restoration. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. Next up on my screen is Tiffany Pereira.
Hello, everyone, and thank you all for being here and joining us this evening. My name is Tiffany Pereira. I'm an assistant research scientist with the Desert Research Institute. My main focus is on the flora and fauna of the desert Southwest. I grew up in California, but I've called Nevada my home now for 10 years, 10 years this year, actually, and I can't believe it. But I spent a lot of my childhood visiting Joshua Tree and exploring, and so it was just a natural move when I came out here, and I'm glad to call it my home.
Thank you. Reuben Kimmelman.
Hi, everybody. I'm Reuben Kimmelman. I am currently living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and that's where I'm from. But I attended graduate school at the University of Nevada, Reno, at the Reynolds School of Journalism and Media. That's where I met my friend Autumn Harry. She told me about the story that you just watched, and that's where I made that documentary as well. So yeah, that's about it. Here in Albuquerque, I'm a bartender currently, looking for a job. So.
Thank you, Reuben. Autumn Harry, producer of the film Surviving.
Hama no Autumn Harry Minani no Kuyui Pop Nanadaway no Kuyui Takota Dene no. Hi everyone, my name is Autumn Harry. I'm a member of the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe, and I'm both Northern Paiute and Navajo. I'm currently a graduate student at the University of Nevada, Reno, studying geography. I'm a really active member of my community out at Pyramid Lake, and my focus and a lot of the work that I do is the health of the fisheries with both the long cutthroat trout and also the koyui. And just water in general is primarily my focus. I wear a lot of hats, such as like, community organizer. I do a lot of activism work in regards to land protection. So yeah, I think that's it. And as Reuben said, I worked with him on the film Surviving.
Thank you. And last but not least, Dan Mosley.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Mosley. Currently serve as a director for Pyramid Lake Fisheries in northern Nevada near Reno. And I'm a native Nevadan, Northern Paiute, and I've been married for 43 years. I have 7 grandchildren and many nieces and nephews, but we got a big family, but some of them are biologists and work in an environmental field. So, good evening. Hello.
Thank you. I feel really fortunate that we were able to get this whole panel together tonight. So thank you all for being here. This time of year around Earth Day, we hear the word conservation quite a lot. We had originally conceptualized this panel to be around native species, but we couldn't talk about that without talking about conservation. So the natural first question is, how do you connect with conservation personally and professionally?
I can take a shot at this one, Megan. The way I connect with conservation personally is I've spent growing up on the reservation near the Grand Canyon and Colorado River in northwestern Arizona. I spent a lot of time on the land. We are cattle ranchers out there, my family, and so just naturally I was always out on the land helping my family do their work, and also out there traditionally for our cultural reasons, and just living life on the reservation. It's just very focused on our environment and our surroundings. And so I think that's just helped me be protective of that environment and want to make sure that we can all, not just us as people, but also the environment be sustainable into the future for us to enjoy, but also to just, have our natural habitat and be beautiful as we see it, and also improve the areas where we can. So that's kind of how I've connected to that.
Oh, yeah.
I'll say for me, conservation is a way of life. That's the way I grew up. I grew up around the wetlands, going around streams, climbing mountains, going fishing. My brothers and we're always getting lizards, getting frogs. Aquarium at home was like what you see in the wetlands, and it's the same kind of aquatic life you see out in the wetlands, and that's the way I grew up. I was just always in touch with nature, in touch with the land, and so when I got older, it's no surprise that at first when I went to university in the 70s, I started as an engineering major because I was thinking, well, I'll go for the money, but after 2 years, I hit calculus, and I said, well, I'm gonna go after the love of my life, which is, being in biology, so I ended up being a fishery biologist. But it's just the way I connect it, and as a Native person, and that's what I enjoy.
Fabulous.
I'll also add on to that. Sorry. I think, this term conservation is still a fairly new term. And I think it's really important to also recognize that, Indigenous peoples don't have the option to conserve or protect. I think that, you know, because we are the original stewards of these lands, it's our responsibility, you know. And growing up at Pyramid Lake, I was always taught that it's our responsibility to protect the land, to take care of the water, and to also understand the history, because you can't really protect or conserve without understanding the history of these places. And especially at Pyramid Lake, you know, we're still dealing with so many of the impacts from the Derby Dam diversion, from all of these upstream developments that are happening within the cities of Reno and Sparks. And so this is all ongoing. But we do have to look to the past to really understand how our ancestors and how, you know, the people before us took care of these lands and use, you know, Indigenous land stewardship practices. And so I just, yeah, I really think it's important to think about the historical implications that we're still dealing with today.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And in terms of just taking care of the land and different species, just adding the idea of intrinsic value. We're not taking care of species and ecosystems just because they have some kind of monetary value to us. It's because it's the land that we live on, and these species, these organisms have a right to exist and live and thrive and be sustainable without them providing a direct monetary measurable benefit to human beings. They have what's called intrinsic value, a value in and of themselves to exist on the landscape. So that's how I tend to view conservation, and how I hold it personally, and try to think about it in my professional work as well, rather than honing in on a certain species and because XYZ, oh, they provide this service to us, trying to look at it holistically for the benefit of the environment, and then in turn us as well, because we live in the landscape too.
Yeah, I think going off of what Tiffany just said, to me, conservation is a rejection kind of this unnatural idea of self-interest. And that, you know, to add on to what Tiffany was saying, it is in our best interest to act unselfishly. You know, as humans, it adds to our mental health, our physical health, physiological health, all those things. It's important to conserve, and it's important to reintegrate ourselves within the natural habitat. And I think part of that is kind of reclaiming a role that we have as humans to be stewards, all humans, and it's part of our humanity and what makes us human.
I feel inspired by that. Our next question: land can hold a lot of meaning for us. Why is the land where you live and work important to you?
Guess I'll hop on this one, get it started. I like to describe the desert Southwest, or deserts in general, using the words stark, subtle, and sublime. It's a often unforgiving landscape, and one that people drive through and they're like, oh my gosh, it's a lot of brown and it's the same plant everywhere. And there's so much going on, but it's a landscape that you have to pause and really take the time to look a little closer, have some patience, get to know it, and start to see those subtle differences. And it just agrees with my personality, I think. And to my mom's dismay, I never moved back to California after coming out here 10 years ago, because it provides a sense of peace and calm. And I just think it's such a great honor to not only feel that way about the land that I live in, but I also get to work with the different species out here as well. And so it's special to me in that way.
I think for me, the land where I live right now, at least Albuquerque, New Mexico, is important to me simply just because it's where my family is. And it's where my family has been for a long time. And part of that is just feeling a sense of place, which can be hard, I think, in this modern world. And then when I was in Northern Nevada, in a very different way, it was like important to me to have my friendship with Autumn and with her family. And that also gave me that sense of home and sense of place there that was able to kind of carry through the relationships that we had and we had formed there. So that's why Northern Nevada is also special to me.
Yeah, I'll add to that too. So for me, you know, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the geography, but at Pyramid Lake, we're at the terminal end of the Truckee River watershed. And, you know, because we're at the terminal end, the water doesn't exit anywhere except through evaporation. And so for me, you know, growing up, it's just been so important to understand how the watershed functions and how we need to really be taking care of it and putting stricter standards on the rest of the watershed so that our water quality is good enough for all of our fish species that are living within the lake. And for me, you know, I grew up on the reservation. I've spent my whole life there. I still live there. And I grew up fishing. Both my parents took me out at a really young age and taught me how to fish. And I've become a really good fisherwoman. And I'm really proud, you know, to be able to say that. And so for me, it's really important to maintain that fishing culture because that's what our ancestors did. And to be able to teach others how to fish, how to gut their fish, how to harvest, because that is what our people survived on. And so, like I said in my intro, you know, the fish and the water is my primary concern. And everything that I do is really to protect our fish species and also the water.
Yeah, and our fish here at Pyramid Lake, they're indigenous only to this lake, Lahan cutthroat trout. The strain that we have here in the Kuyui, are the fish is only place in the whole world where it's found. And so it's really important that we protect those species. And that's the namesake of our people. Originally, they were called Kuyui Dakota. And our sister tribe in the south, Walker River people, they're Agai Dakota or trout eaters. And even a little bit between them and the Mono Lake people, they're the Pakwui Dakota. They're fish eaters. And you know, they're so we're known by what we eat. Today, we're like one big nation. We're fry bread eaters. I just tease when I say that, but we are connected to our resource, and we're known by, you know, that resource that we depended on to survive for thousands of years. I read some early reports from the back when the agents were here, and they said that many other tribes, many bands of people in the Great Basin, there are those that would come and they're to Pyramid Lake during the fishing season when the fish were so innumerable. They say you could walk on the backs of the fish, but some of the tribes that came in, they were really famished, and you know, but there's so much of a great resource everybody shared in that resource, and they other bands of people came and they got the fish, dried them, and they took them back to their homelands. So this land is really important. Everything about it, the smell of the sagebrush, you know, when it rains, all the different four seasons that we have here, this is where I was born and raised and most of my life. So I just really connected to the land here. That's why I love this area, the Great Basin, Northern Nevada.
Great.
I can go too. Yeah, so currently I'm living in Oregon, and I'm fairly new to the area. I've only been here about 6 months now. Actually just 6 months, about a week ago. And so for me, moving here and the work that I do with the Middle Fork Willamette Watershed, while I'm not native here and I haven't grown up here, I still have the same sentiments, and I understand how people are connected to their watershed and how people also want to protect or be stewards of their watershed, and see. I like to see how people come together as a community to do so. And so I've been lucky in the position where I am at with the Watershed Council, where that's a lot of the work that we do is focused on bringing the communities together and working together to steward our watershed that we all live in. And so that's where I've brought my work, and that stems from my own love of the Colorado River watershed, the lower watershed where I'm from, and how important that river is to us and our people. And I just, similarly to how Autumn and Dan are with their watershed, I just know that feeling of this is our primary water source, and this is where, for the Wallapai tribe, the Colorado River is the source of our life, is how we look at it. And so it's just, I can understand that importance, and I really connect deeply to that, and just the love of the river, and even something that extends beyond myself and my self-interest. It goes beyond towards the people, everybody who lives there, and also the environment, the plants and the animals, and just the continuation of what we already have, and making sure that's well into the future.
Thank you. So a question for Autumn, Dan, or kopoka. How can we uphold tribes and Indigenous land stewardship? In other words, how can we be better allies to help conservation goals?
So the way I've done it in past all the years I've worked with the tribe is by telling our story. And because we've grown up in the school system and the education system, hearing the story of the Western civilization, but they haven't heard our story yet, and what we believe and our value system, and what we want to protect, the beneficial uses within. They're all listed within our water quality standards that are now approved by EPA. But when we go to meetings, and when I speak up, I try to let them understand and hear our heart, and how we're connected to the land and to the water, the air quality, and just let them hear our story and talk to them, and become friends with different local governments, people in the local governments, different leaders, the federal agencies, and get to know them over time. And as they begin to understand, we seen the old guard a long time ago, where they didn't want to hear us, and they just wanted to push their own agenda. But over the years, we see that slowly start to change, where after listening to what we believe and what we want to protect, they're starting to come around to our side. Even those that retired, that I used to fight with, or say we used to fight with, but just and they were just working for their agencies or whoever they represented. But now I've seen them fishing at Pereira Lake, the very thing we're fighting for, water quality and the protection of our fish species and everything. And here they are, retired, enjoying our lake, and you just look at me and smile. I go and say hi to them, and but that's what we do. We share our story, and then they can better understand us and become allies with the tribes.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I agree with you. And I think, I would add on to that too. And just, I always encourage people to do their research and to learn about the history of the area that they live in. But at Pyramid Lake, we're known for our fisheries, right? So people from all over the world come to Pyramid Lake to catch these monster lahang cutthroat trout. But a lot of them, they come here to recreate and to fish and to do all these different things, but they don't actually take the time to learn about the history of our people or the land or our culture or how we are so connected to these fish and to the lake. And so I always encourage people to really do their research before recreating on Indigenous lands and learn about the areas that you're traveling to and recreating on. And what Dan was saying, it is so important to establish those relationships with these outside agencies and outside communities too. And yeah, the reason I say and focus so much on the history is because I still meet so many people who either live in Tahoe or Truckee or Reno and Sparks who, they ask me where I live and I said, oh, I'm from Pyramid Lake. And they're like, where's that? And so to me, that's telling me that there's not enough education happening and there's not enough people who are willing to do that work and learning about the watershed that they're living on. And so there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in educating the outside community, even the communities in Reno and Sparks who live just upstream of us. There's still a lot of people who don't really know about the watershed that they're living on and how, us at Pyramid Lake are being impacted by the decisions that are happening upstream. So I always encourage folks to do their research and to learn about the history of the area that they live in, and also support Indigenous-led efforts or even tribal communities that are living where you are.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with everything you both said. And one thing, Autumn, that you just said is upholding the tribes where we live. And so I think that, as Dan mentioned, it is becoming more common, I think, to have this open involvement with tribes. And we just really need to push on that and really encourage people, like Autumn said, to learn the history and understand where the tribes are coming from, because that's the only way we're going to uphold tribal stewardship and tribal values and tribes in general. If people really want to be allies, we need to just acknowledge tribes and understand the history and where they're coming from. And like myself, I can know as much as I know about my tribe, but that doesn't necessarily help me with the history here in Oregon, so I've done a lot of research, and I'm still doing research on the land I'm working on, Kalapuya land, and how we can also uphold the modern day tribes who are disconnected from the land in ways. And so, yeah, I think in terms of, for me, it's interesting. I'm working for technically one of those outside agencies. And so I've had to put on that hat and kind of look at it a different way in terms of how can I help the other tribes with their land. And there's a lot of work to do behind that. And there's a lot of organizations putting in that work, and a lot of people who are working together to collaborate on plans and everything. And so I think it's just, it's a lot of steps for people to actually be good allies, and it's a lot of work, but those are very necessary steps for it to work in the way that actually upholds tribal values, and not just kind of skim over it and talk about it, but actually not do it. I feel like that is luckily something that I feel more people are doing, is actually putting the action behind the words of upholding tribal values. So as long as we keep doing that and putting the work behind it, that's the only way we'll actually really help the tribes, is get behind them and be true allies.
Thank you. That's really articulate. So we're going to have a handful of individual questions now. I have a question for Autumn and Reuben to start. We just encourage people to watch the film Surviving, the story of the Lahontan cutthroat trout. I would love it if you took us to the moment when the idea for the film was born. Where were you, and what inspired you to make it?
I'm going to let Reuben answer that one.
We were in Autumn's car driving from Reno to Pyramid Lake. It was my first time actually going there. And on the way, it's almost an hour drive. She told me the whole story, and I didn't go to graduate school to be a filmmaker or be a documentary filmmaker or anything like that. I went to be a print journalist or a communications scholar. I'm still not sure. But anyway, we're driving up there and she tells me the story, and I knew that I had to do a project for my thesis. Because it's a professional school, we're able to do a project instead of a traditional thesis. And it just sounded like such an amazing story. And I was just so surprised that it hadn't been covered more widely. I was so surprised that I had lived in Reno for, at that point, a few months and had never been to Pyramid Lake. All these things were just kind of shocking to me. And I was like, just started to kind of visualize this as a documentary, and luckily Autumn was on board with me doing it for a documentary and doing it for my thesis project, and yeah, it just really was kind of serendipitous, and just all kind of came together, and I'm really glad that it did.
Yeah, I'm really glad it did too. And I actually really wanted to show Reuben the spawning process that our tribe does every spring. And actually the fisheries is spawning tomorrow. It's that time of year where the fish are trying to reproduce. And I really wanted to show him that process. And I think he's a good example. When you go to the lake with me, you're going to get a history lesson. And, the story about the Lahontan cutthroat trout and Derby Dam and all of these different impacts, and with the decimation of our fish species. I tell that to everyone who's visiting Pyramid Lake for the first time. That's something I explain to them, because it is such a beautiful story of these fish being able to return to Pyramid Lake and actually continue to grow. And now we're seeing 25-pound trout that people are catching. And so it's a beautiful story, and I'm so glad that Reuben, was inspired by that first trip out to the lake, and that we were able to work on this documentary together.
And it's a beautiful film. It was featured in the 2019 Wild and Scenic Film Festival. So congratulations for that. If you're in the audience and haven't seen it yet, the link is with the event invite. So definitely take the 30 minutes. It's really well worth it. So yeah, congratulations to both of you. Reuben, we have another question for you as an artist and as a specialist in media. I love that we can have this conversation. It's a science themed series, but we want to know your perspective about the role that media has in sharing conservation messages to broad audiences. You play a huge role in that. And what are your thoughts around that as an artist and media specialist?
Yeah, well, I think the first role media plays is kind of like, as your event title implies, it's to like distill the information, right? To get it down to its basic components, and then find a way to communicate that where it also doesn't lose its truth or its true essence of the information. So it carries the same weight. And then on top of that, I think the second thing is to add emotional resonance, that people really come away from watching, if it's a film or reading a story or if it's art or whatever it is, that they come away with, and they actually remember it better because it resonates with their emotions and not just the rational side of their brain. So yeah, I think that's it. And like I said in my previous answer, I really I didn't go to school to be a filmmaker or documentary maker, and not a conservation filmmaker or documentary maker. But doing this project, it's even added to its own importance in my personal life. Science, conservation, all those things. I now just read so much and consume so much information on those topics that it's kind of changed me in this way as well. And so I'm really grateful for that. And yeah, I guess, I think going forward, with conservation films and conservation documentaries and stuff like that, there kind of tends to be right now, it seems like the trend is this Patagonia style documentary where you can't really tell if it's an advertisement or if it's a film, and there's not really quite a lot of story. And I think the important thing when making a science documentary or conservation documentary is to remember that the story is entertainment, and that's one part of the story, but also the story is a medicine, or it's if it's not a medicine, it's something there. It's supposed to convey a deeper meaning and deeper information. And I think that's something, I don't have the answer because this was my first film and this is my first thing. But if, moving forward, if I were to do something like this again, or if I work in the industry again or whatever, I would like to incorporate more, bring it back to conveying some information, conveying some sort of truth that's just beyond a bunch of pretty images and inspirational music and stuff like that, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, we can't wait to see what your next project is. So thank you. For those of you, a few of you came late, a few of you in the audience came a little late after I said this. So we encourage you to put questions for the panelists in the chat at any point, and when we finish our panel questions, we'll call on you to ask them to the panelists. So you can just open the chat at the bottom of your screen if you're interested in doing that. I now have a question for Dan. One of the first times I heard you speak, you were actually speaking to a group of high school students about some of your work training other fisheries biologists. And so I'm curious, what's important to you about helping the next generation become fishery stewards?
Well, one motivation I have now is we're all getting older. Everybody at fisheries, half of us are in our mid 60s, ready to retire. And we got a couple more coming up. So, but, working with young people throughout the years, I try to connect to them because we're all biologists at heart. When our people lived on the land, we depended on, we knew the seasons, we're connected to the land, we're connected to the weather, we're connected to the creator who we always give thanks for everything he's given us, for the fish, the roots that we during the spring when we dug up roots, the pine nuts, the rabbits, the wildlife, the deer, everything, and so we have that within us. And so a lot of us, we lost that over the years. So it's really easy for me to connect with younger people and connect them to that biologist that I know that's in them and try to draw that out. So that's what I try to do, talking to high school students. In the beginning, they're kind of, fidgeting and looking away and different things. What they weren't listening to the panelists, but, when I was trying to talk to them, I was trying to connect to them as a biologist and try to speak to them. And when I did many years of training working with other tribes, and it's the same thing, a different, working with tribes in Northern California, around Nevada, Arizona, even other places. And I did the same thing. It's hard for me to do PowerPoints. When I teach people, I stand in the water and I teach them from standing in the water, and I connect them to who they are and how they're connected to the fish. Like in Northern California, they're connected to the eel, to the salmon, the steelhead, and everything else, the berries, and and everything else that they're connected to. But just when I begin to teach them, and it's hard to say that in a few words now, but I just have a way of connecting with them, and that they all really love to get out in the field. I've seen some directors of programs that were in environmental programs that they were going there for a paycheck. But after spending like 2 or 3 days with me out in the field, I seen those guys turn around. I couldn't even get them out of the water. You know, they love to work. They connect it to who they were inside, what the creator created them to be. And it's really neat to see that happen. And same thing with our summer youth turns. I work with a lot of young people, and so there are different ones were going to college for different reasons. I remember one was a geologist. It's kind of like Autumn. I remember I put waiters on this one young person, and I even the younger people. I used to teach them how to drive. Go to the dumps, and I put them in the driver's seat and tell them to drive us to the down that dirt road to the dumps to haul trash. But everything I love teaching the younger generation. And my grandson today, he works with our fisheries. He works with our aquatic invasive species. He works for the tribe for Pereira Lake. And my daughter is graduating this May at University of Nevada, Reno with environmental engineering degree. My son, he was environmental director for Pereira Lake Paiute Tribe. Now he's with Sacramento area office, working with the Bureau of Indian Affairs there, working with tribes. It's really neat to see your kids, follow your footsteps, and they really care about their environment and the natural resources that's important to our people. So, yeah.
You are a gifted teacher, and congratulations to all your family for all that success.
Yeah, thank you.
Kopoka, you mentioned earlier that you have worked along the Colorado River, and in our discussions, you've mentioned your experience rafting down the Colorado, and I'm wondering how those experiences growing up influenced your work and who you are as a scientist.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. Like I mentioned before, the Colorado River is really central to the Walpai people. And so, yeah, it's kind of, for me, I've been on the river, playing in the river, loving the river since I can remember. Like I honestly, I think my first river trip down the Colorado River was when my mom was a river runner back in the 90s, maybe, or yeah. So I honestly, I don't remember. It's been since I was a baby. I've been on river trips, and yeah, I mean, I think in general our identity is just so tied to the river and the canyon, the Grand Canyon, and so as I explored the canyon, both, if you want to say recreationally, which I really don't want to say that, because it was just us wandering kind of like in the backyards, and that just happens to be the Grand Canyon along our reservation. And so we'd go out, just in the canyon with our families, and we were always, trying to go down to the river. We go fishing, we just spend time by the river, and, doing our ceremonies and everything there, of course, too. And as I kind of mentioned before, it just really like that protectiveness kind of is how I've been motivated. Is like I love the river, and I have so many memories and connections, and all these memories of rafting down the river have motivated me to kind of pursue biology and water quality and just anything that kind of was connected to the river. And so that kind of, as I grew up, those river trips kind of waned, mainly because I was in that weird age of not, I don't know, of like not super active on the river at the time in my like teens, I guess. But as I went to college and I was starting to study biology because I knew that's what I wanted to do, it kind of drew me back to the river, where I wanted to take what I was learning of how I could protect the environment, and how I could protect the river, and the things that science kind of like, not, I don't want to say opened my eyes to, but it's like the little details that I didn't quite understand before about what I loved and the environment I loved. And so I ended up going down a long-winded way of saying, I ended up going down these river trips for a different reason after I started learning these things in college. And I started going first as an ethnobotany assistant, assisting our botanists in taking tribal members down the river and doing vegetation surveys, but also doing like cultural demonstrations to youth who, weren't familiar with the botany, ethnobotanical stuff that we do down in the canyon, and otherwise they don't have opportunities to do so. And that kind of evolved into that kind of went hand in hand with my work as a professional. As I kind of delved into water quality, I ended up doing water quality sampling on the tribal river trips down the river. And that was because I wanted to extend everything that I'm learning in my professional life and I'm learning off of the reservation. I want to bring that back to my community, and how can we apply this here, and what can I provide our tribe, and my knowledge and my services that not everybody has the opportunity or, has the capability of going out and learning the things that I've learned. So anything that I can pass back to our community, back to the youth, teaching them about plants that maybe they're just not aware of that are around them just because of that slight disconnection. Kind of as Dan said, it's kind of the way society is heading, is unfortunately in some ways where technology kind of takes over what some of that time would normally be spent outside on the land maybe. So yeah, that's kind of how those river trips have evolved, and I still go on those river trips. I try every year to join our tribal trips down the Colorado River, down the canyon. They're about 2 weeks long, and we take the youth, we take elders, and along the way we're also doing monitoring like water quality, vegetation monitoring, and even archaeological site monitoring. So.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds really special. So Tiffany, at the beginning, when you introduced yourself, you said that species have intrinsic value. And I think that is a term that some people might have heard academically. But recently, you wrote a beautiful piece that was published in the Nevada Humanities blog themed Heart to Heart. And I think that piece really brought to life what intrinsic value means to you personally. And so I'm wondering if you can unpack for us a little bit more your personal connection to the landscape and how it's a container for really human experiences.
Yeah, so I don't know if Allie's going to provide the link to the piece in the chat. Guess she could if folks want to take a look at it. But it invited folks. They were going to do a session specifically on researchers to talk about just the landscape and how a COVID year, how they dealt with it, how people just moved through it. And the desert was so instrumental to just my mental health and well-being, all of the plants and animals that live out here. And what's crazy, I guess, when researchers, we go out to seek funding, I focus on rare plants, threatened and endangered species, and we'll seek out funding specifically sometimes for research targeted on a specific species. But in a year like we had this year where we had no rain, the Southwest, Las Vegas had no monsoon precipitation for the first time on record. Vegas went 240 days without measurable precipitation this year. And I watched the lands, or I guess last year it ended, the streak ended, I believe in December it was. But because of that, this spring has been the driest that I've ever seen. We call it a 0 year. There's no desert annuals coming up. And I worried about the desert tortoises that I've also worked with. What are they going to eat? And, when it comes to research and conservation, we can throw as much money as we can at individual species. But at the end of the day, if we don't address some of these overarching issues, because all of these species have the right to survive and live, and that's that idea of intrinsic value. But if we're not also taking the whole picture into consideration, maybe I hope we don't get more of those 0 years that I wrote about, because then we'd start seeing landscape level effects on the different species that live here. And ultimately us as well, we'd start seeing those impacts as well. You just have to look at the bathtub ring in Lake Mead and know that some changes need to be made, not only for us, but all of the other species that live out here as well. And as a biologist walking around in the desert in a year like this, it was so disheartening, because the desert is usually what brings me so much joy, especially coming out still in pandemic time. But even in that, the dry and no flowers coming up, there were some perennial species that were making their way and doing their very best, and some flowering. And when I saw my first flowering plant, I almost cried, because it was just so amazing to see the adaptations that allow some of these species to make it even in the most rough of times. And you know what? They deserve to live for even that alone, because they're out there trying their best and making it work. And we have a dedication or obligation, as Reuben alluded to earlier, to take care of these species.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope everyone checks out the piece that you wrote. It is really beautiful. So, Autumn, when you introduced yourself, you talked about your commitment to improving water quality and the dedication that you have to the species that live in Pyramid Lake. Do you want to talk about the future work that you envision for your community before we get to audience questions? I want to make sure you have a chance to talk about the future.
Sure. Yeah. I'm going to try to get through this question without crying. But for the future work, I really appreciated Dan's response to his question, because it really is about working with the youth. And in our film, one of the primary characters is my dad, the late Norm Harry, and he passed back in August. So we're still healing from his loss. But he was one of the most knowledgeable people within the reservation who knew about Nevada water law, who knew about the history of Pyramid Lake, especially in regards to obtaining water rights for our reservation and for our people. And we're just so glad that we could interview him and talk to him in that film, because, he had so much of that knowledge and history, and he wasn't stingy with it. He wanted to share, and he wanted others to become educated. And so he passed down a lot of what he knew to me, and made sure that I was also becoming educated. And so my role moving forward, I also see myself in that position to share the knowledge that I have. And, I have great teachers like my dad and my mom, and I've, worked on the streams with Dan and collecting macroinvertebrate samples. And so, I have these really great teachers who, again, aren't stingy with that knowledge and who are wanting to educate the next generation. And so with me, I want to do the same thing. And I see myself in the future working more with some of our youth within the Pyramid Lake Paiute community, not only to provide, historical education and background, but also to take them fishing and to teach them how to fish. And, I think that's really important. And I think once, I know for me, Every time I catch a fish, I've been fishing again for like over 25 years now. But every time I catch a fish and hold a fish, especially the trout, I just feel so thankful, for all of the work that our ancestors did to make sure that we still have those fish today, and that we can actually still go and harvest our traditional foods. And so I want others to continue with that work and to develop the connection with the water, with our fish species. And like Dan said, at Pyramid Lake, we're known as the Kuyui Takata, which is the kiwi eaters. And so those kiwi are directly a part of our identity as Numu, as Northern Paiute people. And so with the work that I want to do in the future, I want to continue this work of working with the younger generations and working with the youth, so that I can continue to pass on the knowledge that was passed down to me from my dad and his elders.
Thank you. Let's take questions from the audience now. Ali, what do we have?
Okay, so our first question is actually going to come from YouTube. This one is from Andrew Church. Can conservation movements run contrary to the well-being of Native communities? How can we avoid top-down authorities or entities being the domineering voice in a conservation movement? So if you'd like to speak to that, anyone on the panel?
I can touch on that a little bit. Yeah, I think the main way to avoid this kind of top-down land management from outside agencies, I think, is what it's getting at. And so that would just basically be bringing in the tribes from the very get-go. And I think that's kind of what a lot of people are pushing for, or are pushing for more often now, is kind of that tribal engagement in the very beginning of things, in the very planning processes, when people have ideas, and at the point when outside agencies are collaborating with each other for getting permits and everything, and talking about those projects in the planning phases, is when tribes need to be involved too. In the very, very beginnings, like before permits are all of that, it needs to be in step with tribes and in partnership when possible. And so I think I think there are also a lot of conservation strategies that do run contrary to tribal values. And while like, for example, like just top thing would be dams and like fire management. Historically, those do run contrary to tribal values and the way tribes have historically managed their lands. And so I think looking back again at the history of how tribes have done things in the past, their history, their beliefs and values, and their contributions to how our environment is today, and how some of these ecosystems can be, or have been, and are continued to be shaped by tribes for thousands of years. So I think taking that into context, and just knowing that tribes should be treated as equal sovereign nations that are also have authority and also have a voice, and just acknowledging that in the beginning is really key.
Our next question will come to us from Linda Curry in our audience. Linda, would you like to unmute and ask us the wonderful question that you asked for Autumn?
So I met Autumn over 10 years ago at a political event when she was just a girl, and she impressed me greatly then. And I've been sort of stalking her on social media for a long time. And I see what she does with river cleanup and feeding the elderly. But I've always wondered, with somebody like Autumn, how does she weigh the impact of the work that she does locally with the potential impact that she could have working like for public policy to change things at a higher level?
Yeah, hi Linda. Nice to see you. Thank you for your question. You know, I feel like the work that I'm doing right now, like you said, with the river cleanups that we've been organizing, we actually just had an Earth Day cleanup this past Saturday, and we've been working to develop, you know, better strategies with the cities of Reno and Sparks to sort of combat the trash accumulation that's happening within the river, within the urban environment, which eventually will end up to Pyramid Lake. So we've been focusing a lot on the trash issue here in the cities. And so, you know, with that type of work, I see the results directly, right? Like we're on the ground, we're picking up the trash, we're removing it from the riverbeds. And so yeah, I think with what I'm doing now, you know, I often get asked, like, when are you going to run for office, or when are you going to run for these local government positions? And right now, I don't feel like I'm at the place to really, you know, work on policy. And so I do feel most suited to working on the ground within my community, you know, catching fish for elders and working on garden projects that are going to directly benefit my communities. And so right now that work is what's drawing me in, because I see the results immediately, and I'm working with, you know, with my actual community members, and we're actually establishing these relationships so that we can continue this work together. But in the future, you know, that may be something that I pursue. It's really unclear right now, but I think I'll focus on getting my master's degree, and then we can see where it goes from there. But I thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Do we have time for one more?
Yeah.
All right, great. Carrie Jensen asked an amazing question specifically to a couple of our panelists, but I think you might be able to ask it to all of our panelists. Carrie, do you want to unmute? And there we go.
Sure. So my question was kind of to Autumn and Dan, but you're right, it can go probably to the entire panel. I just wanted to ask, what would you ask of residents of Reno and Sparks to help support the Paiute tribe out at Pyramid Lake to improve water quality? So if you have specific asks of the communities upstream of you, what would you ask? Like, what can we do to help support you?
Dan, did you want to go? I can, is Dan still on?
Yeah, I'm still on. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead and let you go, Dan.
So one of the things we're combating right now is growth, and a lot of growth in all the North Valleys and surrounding valleys, and so when they direct all of the wastewater into the wastewater facility there in Sparks, and they process it, it goes directly into the Truckee River. So that's what affects us. I'm worried about the future of our water quality, especially like right now, these really low flow years. The lower the flows, the more they're dominated by wastewater and those compounds in the wastewater, integrin, disruptor compounds, and other things that can affect water quality. So in these really low flows like this year, so we have the kuiui, our fish are spawning, and they're going to be spawning the next 2, maybe 3 weeks. And then the larvae are going to be in there. And so those are organic, those waste compounds can affect those fish. And they're in a way that we can't measure them. How can you measure their learning disability or anything like that? But those are things I think about. So how can you help is when to grow smartly. So when Washoe County, as it's growing, they could grow in a smart way. And how can they use that wastewater? You know, have it go back into landscapes and golf courses and parks, and maybe have gray lines in the homes where they can water their lawns, or, you know, there's got to be some way to do that. And also engineering or biofiltering of stormwater runoff. Instead of having it going right off the streets into the river, use vegetation to biofilter some of that before it goes into the wastewater. And also using water in a wise way, our drinking water and how we use it. So you see in Las Vegas, in Arizona, LA, their use of water, they're using it in a really smart way because they have to, especially right now. Lake Mead, by the end of this year, they said it could drop over 200 feet. And it's hard to believe that the lake's dropped that low since 1983, its highest point. So just to grow smartly and encourage our local officials to think about that instead of just passing all these developments. And you look at their plans, what are they going to do with the wastewater? It's going to go right to the wastewater facility, which goes right into the Truckee River, which goes right into Pereira Lake, terminal lake. So.
Yeah, I would also just add, one simple thing that you can do is just visiting the lake itself and, developing that connection. And visiting our cultural center. I think now with COVID protocols, I think it is open again. But if you haven't already been, visit the Pereira Lake Museum and look at the displays that are there and, ask questions. But also, with the river cleanups, we've been taking like tons and tons of trash away from the riverbeds. And, even just like if you have a couple hours on the weekend to just like go down the river, take a trash bag and pick up some trash, I think that also has a big impact as well and can help with that, that over accumulation of trash along the river. But again, I don't mean to be so repetitive, but just understanding the watershed and, doing that research and learning about the history of our Paiute people at Pereira Lake and in Northern Nevada, because we do have this expansive territory. And also just reminding your friends and your loved ones that, Reno and Sparks is on Paiute and Washoe territory, and that's still our land, and we still have a deep connection to it. And so, we do have people who are still working to protect these areas. And, there are Indigenous led organizations and also like our groups, that do these river cleanups, support those groups as well. That's another way to help out.
Thank you. Practical solutions, really important. So we are going to close now. Patrick, do you want to say anything about what's happening at the Discovery that we should know about?
Nothing specific at the museum other than I would encourage you to visit. We have an exhibit called Truckee Connects. That's a working model of the watershed in our region, and it might seem or might be a little more enlightening after tonight's discussion. So I hope you'll come check that out. One thing I forgot to mention earlier in my remarks was that we want to be sure to thank two sponsors that normally support this series. That's Imbibe Custom Brews and Patagonia. Hopefully, as things continue to improve in our community, we'll be back to hosting Science Distilled events live and in person, so we can raise a glass together right downtown at the Patagonia outlet. And I also want to make sure I say thanks to everyone who attended this evening, and a special thanks to our panelists. It was a great discussion.
I want to echo that. This was a really meaningful discussion. It's been an enlightening process for me, getting to know you all throughout the course of planning this. And so I sincerely thank you all for sharing your thoughts and your hearts with us. So thanks to the whole audience. Like Patrick said, I echo that sentiment as well. Save the date for our next Science Distilled event. It's going to be on June 9th, and we will be featuring folks who are working really hard to make advances in cancer research. So that is all. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, Reuben. Bye, Dan.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Megan.
Thanks, Megan, everybody.
Thank you all. We're getting lots of nice comments in the chat too for all of our panelists. So thank you all.
Cool. One of my frogs is calling.
I love that sound. Talk about conservation. The beauty of the desert right there.
It's a morning and evening. So if I have calls in the morning, I have to be like, don't mind my frogs so that I can't move out of this room.
Don't mind my tree peepers.
I know it sounds like a bird, but it's a frog. Oh man. Well, thank you, Allie, and
Thank you.
Megan and Patrick for organizing. Really appreciate it.
You were brilliant as always, my friend.
Yeah, you guys did great. It was a really, really good discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's the first Science Distilled, Megan. Now I have one under my belt.
Great. That's right. I hope it won't be the last.
We should have a speaker commemorative glass or something.
Just like etch a notch in it each time we do it. I feel like Monica would have like a few. Bye, guys. You have a wonderful.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Ronald, do you want to say something?
How are the bighorn sheep doing out there that got introduced?
You know, Dan has left. Are you asking for Dan?
Just if anyone knew, I got in late and I missed the movie part, but just the discussion, and I'm curious
Not
how
sure.
they did over the winter.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah, I was part of the roundup of the sheep, but I don't know how they're doing presently.
How was that, Tiffany?
That was fun. It was they basically hire guys from New Zealand or Australia that shoot nets out of a helicopter at sheep, and then we help process them. So I've done it a couple times with them now, and then they relocate them elsewhere. So
That's amazing.
I'm not in the helicopter, but
Shooting the nets. No, that's not you.
yeah.
Right.
The roundup is still pretty wild. That's a wild role. That's really cool.
Yeah. So they just
Anyway, thanks so much.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Ronald. See you next time.
All right. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Ronald.
all righty. Bye, guys.
Take care.
All right. Have a good night, Tiffany. Thanks for joining us.
I'll stay on until you disconnect.
It's just you and me, friend. That's all last man standing. Wait a second. Participants. Yeah, I moved the other ones back to the waiting room. Apparently that's a thing.
Okay. It still says live for me, so I don't know if we have to formally cancel.